But I want to go to my man, John Kiriakou, the man of the hour. He is a former CIA spy, whistleblower of that organization. John Kiriakou, definitely check out many of his books. John, where can people find you now, though? You are doing speaking engagements all across Europe. You've got a fantastic opportunity. Where can people find you now? I just want to give a heads up to the audience.
Well, thanks for asking, Jamal. The best place for me is Substack. I'm also active on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all under John Kiriakou.
Okay. John, I have to start with USAID. As I was telling the audience, it's not so much that I'm fascinated that USAID was knocking over governments or doing everything in their power to do so. In various countries, 9 out of 10 of the media in Ukraine apparently was coming out of USAID or being paid for it. We found billions that have been put into either Syria, Hungary, Romania, all of these governments that were effectively under pressure because we didn't necessarily like the person who was in office. And we, in our take, wasn't pursuing a liberal agenda. And by liberal agenda, meaning being full-throated for various wars that we were involved in. I am fascinated by the fact that we're talking about it.
Yeah.
This is usually something that you just hear in whispers, not necessarily something that's put on the pages of media and press. And weirdly enough, it is the Democrats that seem to be more aggrieved by the fact that the USAID is on its way out. I'm fascinated by that. Give me your take on how did the CIA manage to use these groups to affect American policy abroad? Because at some point, a choice was made. Oh, yeah, the CIA is still going to operate, but it is far easier to use groups like this to enact that power, to enforce, or let's say to get our power across, as opposed to us being the exact front to doing so. These organizations were being used. Explain how that worked in practice, if you can.
Well, think of it this way. Think of USAID as being something of a propaganda adjunct of the CIA. And I'll tell you, one of the things that's been very interesting to me, Jamal, in this latest go-round with USAID is that none of this information is new. None of it. We've known this for decades. And I'll give you some examples. In 1973, Ted Kennedy wrote a letter to the CIA saying, is it true that you're using USAID to carry out CIA covert operations in Indochina? And much to Ted Kennedy's surprise, he received a response, 2 responses actually. He received a response from Henry Kissinger, who was the Secretary of State at the time, and from the director of the CIA saying, actually, yes, we are using USAID as a cutout for CIA covert operations. But not just in 1969, which was the year that Kennedy had asked about. They admitted to doing so in Laos in 1969, 1970, 1971, and 1972. That document was declassified, and it's freely available on the internet. You could see Kennedy's letter, and you could see Kissinger's response and the CIA response. Fast forward many years, George W. Bush is president, and he doesn't like the government of Bolivia. And so he decides to overthrow it. Well, you can't just, flip a switch and overthrow it. You have to propagandize the people of that country. Right. And so what does he do? He does that through USAID. And it's like these policymakers, Jamal, it never occurs to them that these documents will eventually be declassified. And these documents are what historians will use to judge the efficacy of our, foreign aid programs that are supposed to be run through USAID. Instead of documenting foreign aid, they're documenting CIA covert action operations. And it wasn't just George W. Bush. Barack Obama allowed USAID to set up a CIA radio station and a social media platform called Zunzunio that was supposed to encourage something akin to an Arab Spring, but in Cuba, to overthrow the Cuban government. It was a miserable failure. And again, those documents were declassified. So this is something that has gone on for decades, and nobody is terribly good at covering it up.
Why do you think it took Trump to do this? Like, why do you think it's Donald Trump being the one saying, I'm tired of the USAID. This needs to stop. It needs to stop now. And because what's wild about it, you're getting screams out of Europe saying, oh my God, independent media is being undercut by the U.S. government pulling and freezing USAID, which is an astonishing headline, because it's like, well, wait a minute, how is it independent media if the United States government is putting the bulk of the money behind this quote unquote independent media? It's astonishing. Why does it take a Trump to do this?
That is such a great question. And it is something that I think future PhDs are going to be based on. Here's my own philosophy, and I think I'm right on this. But if you look back at the election, the presidential election of 1932, that is what historians call a watershed election. In that, before 1932, it was the Republicans who were the liberals. It was the Democrats who were the Southern conservatives. But the Democrats nominated Franklin Roosevelt, who was a New York liberal. In fact, he had been the Secretary of the Navy, I think it was, in a Republican administration. In 1932, the two parties switched sides, and the Democrats became the liberals with the creation of the New Deal, and the Republicans became the conservatives. I think we are in the midst of a slow motion watershed change again, where it's not liberals and conservatives flipping, it's statists and populists. And Donald Trump is a populist, and he's causing politics to sort of flip on its head, where you've got working people, union members who have been Democrats for 4 or 5 generations, now flipping and becoming Republicans, and not just Republicans, but Trump Republicans. And as part of this populism, I'm going to call it Trumpism, includes this anti-government, anti-establishment bent that is very appealing to people. Listen, I would venture to say a majority of Americans think that the U.S. Budget deficit is largely due to foreign aid. In fact, foreign aid accounts for 1/10 of 1% of the federal budget. It has nothing to do with the federal deficit. But Trump wants people to believe that. And it's a way to cut foreign aid. It's a way to do away with USAID. It's a way to target things like the Broadcasting Board of Governors and the Voice of America and all this other stuff that Democrats have come to love. Also, Trump is confident enough that he believes if there's going to be major change on the international front, it will be by force of his personality. We don't need the likes of USAID to do our dirty work, right? Donald Trump can pick up the phone and call Kim Jong-un and forgive me, he can call Kim Jong-un and he can, ask him to meet, and they can meet in Singapore and they can do whatever they want. So I think we're in the midst of this kind of change.
No, that's fair. I accept that. I guess I looked at it also on some level, the same entities that liberals have used to kind of overthrow governments that Trump may consider also populist, or at the very least, let's say governments that are more in line with what he wants to do in the world.
Yeah.
That, the money that was invested to get rid of Carl Kiriakou, for example, in the Romanian election. Okay, well, Carl was one of those people saying, we're not going to be involved in this Ukrainian conflict. I don't want to be involved in this. And then you get the court to annul that election. And on top of annulling that election, you're like, whoa, you guys have just blown off an election. Then you find out here again, we have USAID that was being used to spend money to enforce, or let's say to put out a certain point of view of the world that was going to run contrary to what Kiriakou was going to do. Okay, is that a coincidence? I don't think so. Is Kiriakou somebody who will most likely be able to work with Trump? Yes. Does Europe like him? No.
Absolutely.
And same thing with Orban. The same thing with Fico in Slovakia. The same thing will be true for the French government, whoever, Marie Le Pen ends up picking, if not Marie Le Pen herself in 2027. That's assuming Macron stays the entire time. And the same thing with Germany in the election that's coming up, where you may get the AfD taking prominence in the government coming up. Like, that's astonishing. And so from his point of view, USA will be against all of this stuff. Like, meaning all of these people who he may be able to work with going forward, and who may be against.
Not necessarily, because his opposition and traditional American opposition has been opposed to left-wing populism.
Yes.
Evo Morales, for example.
Yes.
USAID worked hard to overthrow Evo Morales.
Yeah.
The Cuban government, over successive presidencies, 3 that we know of. So I think it's a little bit different because these guys, the European leaders or would-be leaders that you're talking about, also see themselves as populists in that Trump mold. And I think that he sees, kinship there.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I guess that's my point.
Yeah.
He sees kinship. And seeing that kinship, USAID was working against all of this element. I agree with you, right? That if we're talking about Bolivia, if we're talking about, let's say, Ecuador, if we're talking about these kind of left-wing governments that are taking hold, let's say in South America, 1,000% agreed. USAID was working hard, even against Venezuela, to get rid of these guys.
Even against Venezuela, yes.
But in Europe, it's different. It's the liberal order that seems to be against what Trump wants to do, not just in Ukraine, but just in general in regards to this kind of what seems to be an acknowledgement and an acceptance by the Trump administration that we're in a multipolar world. Mm-hmm. And that this idea that we're going to work with Europe in order to be the unipolar power in this world is over with. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, Europe is not on board for that. They've been crying miserably. In fact, they've been screaming, okay, we are going to try to now maintain the war in Ukraine. Okay, good luck with that. That's not going to happen. But that's where their mindset was. And so you get all of these European leaders who are saying, okay, we're tired of this war. And what happens? All of the pressure in the world are applied to those governments. So that it's applied to the Georgian government. It's applied to the Romanian government. It's applied, Germany is a little bit different just because the government collapsed. I guess I'm trying to point out, it seems that people who would be in line with Trump were the ones who were at the edge of USAID. Whereas it's not necessarily something that the liberal order in Europe was okay with. I don't know. I was just fascinated by why it took Trump to be the guy who looked at this and said, this is a problem. We're overthrowing governments. Why are we doing this? It's just fascinating.
When you've got the Democratic nominee for president of the United States, not just pursuing, but then celebrating the endorsement of Dick Cheney, you know that the parties have flipped.
Something's wrong.
Something's just nuts in American politics right now.
How's the CIA looking at Trump's presidency? I know you don't know that. You're not still part of the organization. Right. But to get a president who comes in and effectively is like, we are upsetting the apple cart. This is not business as usual in the way that we operate.
I have a couple of minds on this.
Please.
Trump talked big in the first term and then appointed like the 2 worst possible people that he could have appointed as CIA directors, Mike Pompeo and Gina Haspel. Haspel being the consummate insider, 30 plus years in the agency, and Mike Pompeo being the agency's biggest apologist in years. It's different this time because John Ratcliffe is somebody that Trump can trust. I'm worried about this new deputy director, David Cohen. He's the former general counsel at the Heritage Foundation. That bothers me very much. But I'm not sure that the CIA lifers really care so much because Trump's a lame duck, and he's out in 4 years. He's out. And even if J.D. Vance replaces him, they could probably deal with J.D. Vance. He doesn't have any experience at all. He's been in the Senate for a minute?
Yeah.
And so I think that the CIA is going to slow roll this president. If he orders something that they don't like, they just move in slow motion. And in 4 short years, he'll be gone and they can deal with whoever comes out of the ashes.
So basically wait him out.
Yeah. And they've done that in the past when there were presidents they didn't like Jimmy Carter, for example, or Bill Clinton. You just move very slowly. Presidents come and go. And these CIA people are there for 25, 30, 35 years. They know that they can outwait whoever happens to be president.
Trump seems to believe, though, that the CIA and let's say the intel, because I'm combining the FBI and the CIA in this, were instrumental in trying to have him removed in this whole Trump and Russia stuff. Meaning he has a skepticism of this intelligence service in a way that is not present in the Democratic Party. And usually it's not even present in presidents in general. Maybe JFK was the last one who had this kind of, I'm going to destroy the CIA and blow it to the wind, that type of stuff, having a church committee to kind of pull out all of the dirty secrets that these guys were effectively out there doing. How do you frame that in regards to how does a president who's skeptical of the intelligence service work with that same intelligence service, which he will have to as he pursues whatever objective he's pursuing?
That's a great question. And, I'm not sure. There have been presidents who, in our lifetime, who have been totally into whatever it is the CIA is doing, and presidents who have kept the CIA at arm's length. As you said, John Kennedy famously said that he wanted to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. And then he was dead 5 weeks later.
Right.
We've had presidents who have declined their 6-day-a-week CIA briefing, the PDB, the President's Daily Brief. Bill Clinton was president for 8 years and was briefed 3 times.
Wait, why would they decline that?
Not interested. Not interested in anything the CIA is doing. Al Gore was interested, and Al Gore was briefed 6 days a week and then told the CIA that if they could brief him a 7th day, he would take it. But Bill Clinton had zero interest in
wait, you gotta dig into that for me. Why would the president be against getting the briefing from the CIA?
Because it's the economy, stupid, remember? It was all about the economy. He didn't give one whit about foreign policy until he was forced to in Yugoslavia. But he left all that to Al Gore. He had zero interest. Zero. In fact, in his second term, I was still in the Directorate of Intelligence at the time. There had been reporting in the Washington Post that he wasn't receiving a briefing, that he had received one briefing in his entire first term. And so he wrote a letter to the CIA workforce saying that while I'm not being briefed, that is correct, I do read what you write for me. So keep it coming. It's great stuff. I love what you do. I think you're great. That was all nonsense. He didn't give a shit about the CIA.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell us something that we don't know about the organization that would shock us.
Well, I'm on record over the last 18 years of being something of a CIA dissident.
Yes.
I think the CIA should be broken into 1,000 pieces and scattered to the wind, like John Kennedy said. But one thing that may shock you is that most CIA employees are wickedly smart, dedicated, patriotic, good people who want nothing more than to serve the American people. The shame of the organization is that just by the nature of its creation, it's an espionage organization.
Right.
Its leadership is not someone I would want in my home or babysitting my children. And since 9/11, it's become a paramilitary organization whose reason for being has morphed from recruiting spies to steal secrets and to analyze those secrets to provide the policymaker with the best informed policy, over to killing the people whose politics we don't like.
Mm-hmm. Do you see that changing anytime soon?
No.
That is just the way they have just fundamentally shifted.
Yeah,
and changed.
they've fundamentally shifted. And as I said, presidents come and go, and the CIA is there always. And so they know that there's nothing any president can do to them.
What you're talking about is the deep state.
Yes.
This notion that, it's like, regardless of what the head may be trying to do on the outskirts, at the very end of the day, we are still going to be what we are. We're going to continue these policies as we move forward. Wow. Okay. That's unfortunate. I mean, because you would think that a president that was skeptical of the CIA would have more control over that organization.
You'd think. Now, one thing that Jimmy Carter did, because Jimmy Carter was skeptical of the CIA, Jimmy Carter named Admiral Stansfield Turner as the CIA director. And he didn't have a personal relationship with Turner, but Turner had a reputation in the Navy. And remember, Carter came from the Navy. Turner had a reputation as being Mr. Clean. And so the first thing that Turner did was he just fired en masse, a quarter of the operational workforce. and they called it the Friday Night Massacre. And you hear old timers still at the CIA. I mean, they're retired now, but when I was there, old timers would say, you know, that damn Carter and damn Turner. Someday we're going to get revenge against those guys. They fired people who were just weeks short of their pensions. That's not the issue of all, whether somebody was weeks short of his pension.
Mhm.
The issue is, were those people violating the law? And the answer was yes. And so Carter did something about it. We had just come out of the Church Committee. We had just come out of these mid-1970s reforms, or what were supposed to be reforms of the CIA. In 1977, Carter became president. He said, what happened to these reforms? These were supposed to be enacted a year ago, 2 years ago. And you're telling me the CIA hasn't changed at all? Except maybe, possibly now they're not murdering heads of state? Maybe. So he went in and just fired everybody. My very first briefing as a junior analyst at the CIA was to give a briefing to Stansfield Turner. Retired directors are entitled to on-demand briefings classified up to the secret level. So I had been on the job for maybe 3 months, and Stan Turner was offered 2 free tickets on a cruise in exchange for giving a lecture about the cruise was going through the Persian Gulf, and he had to give a lecture on Gulf pro-democracy movements. So I was excited because this is a former DCI. And my boss, as I was getting ready, I was putting my jacket on to go do the briefing. And my boss stopped me and he said, unclassified only. And I said, why? I said, he's a former DCI. He's entitled to secret. And he said, we don't do anything for Stan Turner. Nothing.
Wow.
He said, unclassified only. Well, this was what, 11, 12, 13 years after Stan Turner had initiated the Friday Night Massacre. And they were still furious.
Wow, they remembered.
Oh, and I remember people saying, like I said, oh, I briefed Stan Turner today. And one of the other analysts said, he's lucky they even let him onto the compound.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was bad.